Follow Safe Tales and Taste of Africa with Lady Maurine for stories that touch your soul. Stories that remind us all that faith, resilience, and courage can change our destiny. This is the story of Beatrice, a woman who faced betrayal, hardship, and doubt, yet rose to greatness through determination, faith, and God's grace. Beatrice was 28, beautiful in a quiet, understated way. Her eyes held warmth, hope, and a deep kindness, and her smile, though simple, could light a room. She grew up knowing hardship, small meals, leaky roofs, crowded spaces, but she also grew up believing in one thing: that hard work, honesty, and faith in God would carry her farther than anyone could imagine. She married Enos, a man slightly older, around 30, ambitious but unsure, a man whose dreams were often bigger than his means. At first their life was modest. A small home, a simple room with a tiny kitchen that barely held a table and a stove. The nights were long, sometimes cold, often quiet except for the soft creaks of their wooden floorboards or the occasional drip from a leaky roof. Despite everything, Beatrice never complained. She worked tirelessly. She woke early, swept the floor, drew water, cooked breakfast, and whispered prayers for strength. Even when Enos doubted himself, she encouraged him. She told him, softly but firmly, "We will rise. Enos, we will find our way." And one evening, after a long day of silent effort and whispered dreams, she said something that would change the course of their lives. "Enos, I have an idea. A small idea, but I believe it can change everything for us." Enos looked at her skeptical. He had faced disappointment before. He had seen plans fail, money disappear, opportunities lost. Yet, in Beatrice's eyes, he saw a certainty he could not ignore. Her faith was contagious. They began with nothing. Literally nothing. They borrowed money from relatives who barely had enough to survive themselves. They borrowed from neighbors, from friends, even from acquaintances who trusted Beatrice's determination and Enos's charm. With the borrowed funds, they bought cement, nails, a small wheelbarrow, and rented a tiny roadside shop. It was humble, bare, yet full of promise. Beatrice woke each morning before the sun rose. The first rays of light barely touched the horizon when she was already kneading dough, cleaning the floor, arranging cement and nails in the shop, and whispering prayers to God. She counted each coin meticulously, planning how every shilling would be spent. She smiled at the first customer, even if her hands shook from exhaustion, even if her back ached from long hours of labor. Slowly, the world began to notice. Customers trickled in at first, workers needing cement, a nail or two, a bag of charcoal. Then more began to come. Enos was proud but sometimes distracted. Beatrice remained focused. Every day, she learned something new. Every day she adapted. She began to notice which products sold faster, which days had more customers, how to greet them with warmth, how to make them feel at home in a tiny, dusty roadside shop. Her mind was always calculating, planning, dreaming. Money began to grow, slowly but surely. They bought a pickup to deliver goods. They rented a slightly larger space for the shop. They moved from the small home they had shared, still humble, still modest. But the first fruits of their labor were beginning to show. Yet, as the business grew, something shifted. Enos changed. Small prideful habits grew into arrogance. He began staying out late, speaking less of his plans, listening less to Beatrice. The love that had once united them began to waver, replaced with desire for validation and status. And then she came. Lillian, 25, young, vibrant, fashionable, and wealthy. She smiled at Enos in a way that drew him in. She whispered flattery, ambition, and temptation. Beatrice noticed, of course. She noticed the glances, the longer silences, the subtle shifts. But she did not confront him immediately. She prayed. She focused on her growing business, on her vision. One morning, after months of subtle betrayal, it happened. Enos, no longer the man she had known, shouted at her, "Pack your things. Leave my house." Beatrice stood, silent. She was 3 months pregnant. Her heart shattered, yet her resolve hardened. She left with only what she could carry: a small bag, her dignity intact, and the child she would protect no matter what. She moved into a tiny single-room house. The roof leaked. The walls were cracked. The floor was cold. But Beatrice's spirit was unbroken. She began cooking food. Chapati, beans, rice, selling it to nearby workers, the mango, who labored tirelessly under the hot sun. Her hands were raw. Her back ached. Some nights she cried herself to sleep. Yet every morning, she rose again. God remembered her. Her food business began to grow. Slowly, methodically, persistently, she saved every coin, invested every shilling. She opened a small cafe. Then a second. Then she moved to the city, opened her first restaurant. And then more. 4 years later, she owned a chain of restaurants. Her children grew healthy and bright, a constant reminder of the love and resilience that had brought them into the world. Beatrice's days in the tiny house were long and grueling. The morning sun barely broke through the thin curtains when she was already awake, kneading dough for chapati, stirring beans in a small pot, and preparing rice for the laborers who depended on her humble food. The room smelled faintly of smoke and spices, a comforting yet bitter reminder of how far she had fallen, yet also of how far she could rise. Each day, she walked the dusty streets to sell her meals to the Mingo, who labored tirelessly under the unforgiving sun. She greeted them with a smile, serving steaming plates with care. Some laughed with her. Some complained about the heat, the long hours, the fatigue of life. She listened patiently. She shared words of encouragement when she could. In those moments, Beatrice was not just feeding their stomachs, she was feeding hope too. At night, when the house was silent, she reflected on her life. She remembered the warm days with Enos, the shared dreams, the laughter and whispered plans in their tiny home. And she remembered the day he sent her away. The sharpness of betrayal stung, but she clung to one truth: her worth was not defined by someone else's choices. She whispered prayers for strength, for guidance, for patience. Weeks turned into months. Her food-selling business began to grow. She saved diligently, reinvesting every coin she earned. Her menu expanded. Chapati with beans, rice with vegetables, stews made from the simplest ingredients. Word spread among the workers: Beatrice's food is hearty, cheap, and made with care. Slowly, her tiny venture became known throughout the neighborhood. Eventually, she rented a small cafe. The walls were old, the floor uneven, but it was hers. She worked tirelessly, waking before dawn, cooking, cleaning, serving customers, managing supplies, and keeping careful accounts. Her life was a whirlwind of labor, prayer, and hope, but her faith never wavered. As the cafe flourished, she hired her first employee, a young woman who reminded Beatrice of herself in her earliest days. Beatrice taught her how to cook with care, how to serve with love, and how to handle customers with respect. Each lesson she imparted was a reminder of the life she had endured, the pain she had survived, and the vision she now carried forward. Over the years, her small cafe became a thriving restaurant. She moved to the city, expanded, opened multiple branches, and became a respected businesswoman. Her 2 children grew strong and healthy, a reflection of the life she had built through resilience and faith. And then, one day, she received a wedding invitation. Her heart paused. It was from Enos, the man who had once been her world, now marrying Lillian, the flashy woman who had come between them. Beatrice smiled softly. She felt no bitterness, only calm. She had nothing to prove. She had built her life from nothing, nurtured her children, and earned respect through sweat, patience, and prayer. She was whole. The day of the wedding arrived. She walked into the hall, radiant and elegant, her children walking proudly beside her. Guests gasped. Lillian froze. Enos' face paled. His pride shattered, his confidence crumbling under the weight of realization. The woman he had cast aside was now a powerful, successful force in her own right, and the children he had neglected were standing with her as living proof of their shared past. He tried to speak, to call her back, to explain, to plead. But Beatrice only smiled. Calm, composed, and resolute, she whispered to herself, "I forgave, but the door you closed will remain closed." She walked away, leaving Enos alone in the silence of the hall. Lillian, the wealthy and flashy woman, could only stare in shock. The guests whispered, some in admiration, some in awe, all aware that a life built with integrity, courage, and faith could not be shaken by betrayal. Beatrice's story is a testament to resilience. It is proof that no matter how hard life may push, or how deep betrayal may cut, faith, hard work, and courage will always carve a path toward triumph. From a tiny kitchen to a chain of restaurants, from heartbreak to restoration, from despair to dignity, Beatrice rose. And she rose with grace, strength, and unwavering faith. And that was the journey of Beatrice, a story of faith, courage, and triumph against all odds. Follow Tales and Tastes of Africa with Lady Maurine for more stories like this. Stories that inspire, uplift, and touch the heart.